Hi everybody, here's an intro to my video about pulling off my intake manifold and deleting the TGVs and then putting everything back together. It took me 13 hours. So basically my car has a new IAG block and stuff and turbo and all kinds of things. And like the day before I was supposed to go take it to get it dyno tuned and the final tune done on it and everything, the right-hand side TGVs started sticking closed. So I was like, well, really only one thing to do. Gotta happen at some point. Gotta tear everything out and get rid of the TGVs. I drilled out the screws and removed the flapper valves with needle nose pliers, cleaned everything, and then put it all back together. So the solenoids are still on there, and the little divider, like plane between where the injector goes in and the tube for the airflow, that's still separate. I didn't bother cutting and grinding that out because I didn't have time. Anyway, so you'll see all of this in the video, but there are three things that I learned that I just wanted to put here in the beginning. Geez, what are they? One, however much brake clean you have, go back to the store and buy like twice as much, because I spent an hour and a half after drilling out the screws. I didn't cut anything in there, just drilling out the screws and the metal shavings from that. I spent an hour and a half with a wire bristle brush, scrubbing everything, getting all the metal shavings out. The inside of my TGVs was pretty cruddy. You got to remember that like there's oil and blow-by in the intake, but there's no fuel being sprayed into that air, intake portion of the TGVs. So there's a lot of carbon buildup and stuff in there. It's oily, and the metal shavings stick to all of it. You really, really, really want to get them all out. So load up on brake clean. Number two, you have to take your injectors out and reinstall them. With that, I think it makes sense to have backup O-rings for the injectors, because it's not that hard to tear them. And if you tear or mess up one of the O-rings, then you won't be able to operate the car until you get replacements, and it could take a while. And that's a whole lot of wasted time where you can't really run it. You can't even figure out whether you did everything right. You just have to sit there. The car would be parked. That's what happened to me. My tuner overnighted me O-rings though, and then I managed to do it right that time. As it's been explained to me, you just want to put the injectors in like dead straight, which is actually kind of really hard to do because they're angled and they're almost slightly bent from the fuel rail into the injector port, the injector on the TGVs. I had read or been told whatever that you should put them up into the fuel rail first and then put them down into the housing. And that worked. That seems like that was the thing to do. That was proper, but you just really want to make sure that you don't snag them on the edge of anything. You don't want to put them in there and like start twisting them back and forth and stuff. Which brings me to another really important point. Before you take the injectors out, look at the orientation of the plugs on them. You want to put them back in with the plugs for the connectors facing the same way, so that it's easy so that you know that the wiring harness, that the plugs will connect to the injectors, because in some orientations of the injectors, some directions that you could have the plug facing off of the injector, then the plug from the wiring harness would interfere with other hardware that's there, like the shield that protects the fuel rail and stuff, which I got rid of because screw those things, or the hardware for the TGVs, like the solenoids or stuff like that. So try to look at that before you take them out and then reinstall the injectors with the plugs in the same orientations. There's a screw. I'm gonna show you this. Actually, yeah, okay. So then also when you're taking them out and when you're reinstalling them, on the passenger side, it doesn't have this. But on the right-hand side, on the driver's side, this is where the fuel line and fuel return come in and stuff. And there's a screw up on top of the intake manifold that holds that assembly with the fuel line and the fuel return there. take the screw out. I didn't bother to the first time, or I didn't realize, you know, whatever, I left it there, and it makes it so much more difficult. Once you take the screw out, everything lifts up. It's much easier to get the fuel rail and the injectors out. All right, I'm going to grab you and take you over here and show you that screw. So here's your fuel line in, fuel return. This is some kind of breather, I believe, or maybe that's the return and this is a breather. Anyway, it's this screw right here that holds the whole assembly on. So take that out. That'll make things easier. What's the one other? Oh, right. The one other thing. When I took the intake manifold off, I didn't remove the alternator. I'd heard people say like, hey, remove the alternator. And I was like, it's not attached to any of this. It doesn't connect. Like, why would I remove the alternator? It's more work. Remove the alternator. Do it. Because it's so easy. You know, it's like you loosen this bolt, then you screw that, and you loosen this bolt, and then you screw that down, and then you just like take that bolt out, take this bolt out, and you can at least then take the alternator and like move it over there. I don't have AC anymore, so I just put it out of the way. But it's super quick and easy. And underneath here, there is a coolant temp sender, and I forget, I think there was something else underneath there too that you can't get at and you don't see, you don't even realize it's there until you have everything else done and you're lifting up and lifting up and lifting up on the intake manifold and you can't get it out, and then you realize that there's this little tiny plug down in underneath there, and that's what's holding you up. So you got to remove that. You can see where there's the crank angle or whatever, crank position sensor, but then further back in underneath there, there's another plug, and you don't want to mess them up. So take the alternator out and it'll make your life way, way easier. That's it. Just, you know, take your time, be patient, don't get frustrated, because it's a complicated, frustrating job. Here's the rest of the video. I'm so close. This is taking me a couple of hours, I think, to get it to this point now. I was thrown off. I thought I had all the bolts holding the whole intake manifold assembly out, but I have a oil pressure, aftermarket like mechanical oil pressure gauge that I added recently during the build, and it's goes into the block, but it was mounted to the intake manifold, so that held me up for probably a good half hour or something, and it's down underneath, so I couldn't see it, and I was just trying to figure out like why something was still holding it in place. Anyway, I think it's free now. I unplugged the coil packs and the everything from the throttle body. As you can see, it's fucking sitting there looking fucking horrible. It's really hard to look at the motor this way and just have everything like just a mess. I really want to get this out, so it just makes me uncomfortable. All right, I got my intake manifold out. No intake manifold, just a mess here. All I can say is the same advice that I saw everywhere else on YouTube that didn't really seem super helpful to me at the time. Is, you know, like do the 4 bolts that go through the TGVs on either side. There's one in the front, 2 in the center, 1 in the back. Undo all 8 of those, get them totally undone, and then just keep lifting up on it and looking for what else is still there holding it in place. And you just keep going, you know, and realizing, oh, you've got to unplug the coil packs. Oh, there's a little tiny oil sending. I think I can zoom in on it here. There's this little oil sender, I think, down here on the front of the block. I don't know if it actually works, but that you can't really see or reach until you get the intake manifold partially loose. So yeah, that was the thing. Okay, that's where I'm at now. Got the TGVs off. Got my ID 1050s out. I think I have everything here relatively organized. God, figuring out where the harness, everything plugs back in is going to be crazy. But I got the TGVs out. Excited about that. So now, I've seen two different ways to do this. You can either drill the screws out or cut the screws off with a Dremel. I'm gonna just drill them out because I know that that's gonna work, and it shouldn't mess up the this bar, this axle here. Super dirty in here, but you know, I mean, these are one of the only, this and the intake manifold, actually, thinking about it, are the only original mechanical pieces left on the car, basically. So these have got 200,000 miles on them, so I guess no wonder they're grimy in there. Anyway, I'm going to get to drilling now. Oh, I should add, I've seen this in other videos, and I'm going to drill a pilot hole first. So I'm using a little bit, and then I'm going to use a larger bit. Seems like it's probably a bad idea to just do it in one fell swoop, one drilling it out with one big. So anyway, just a note, if you're doing this, use several bits, use a little one first to drill a pilot hole. Something quickly to add right here. So I got them all drilled out, and you'll see there's a ton of metal debris here left on the butterfly valves. I'm going to go to town on it with brake clean, but I'm going to do that. I'm going to clean this all up before I try to pull the butterfly valves out, because right now it's like it's all contained right there, and I feel like it'll be easier to get all of this out if I just hold it upside down and spray that all down with brake clean and stuff, and like then I'll pull them out, and then I will clean it again and go to town on it, because I really don't fucking want any of this in my new IAG block that has like 900 miles on it right now. And you shouldn't want it in your motor either. Okay, so after I had to re-drill one of them, but basically they all popped right out. Here's one of them. So they just, let me see. Well, actually, I guess I can't really rotate this anymore. Yeah, you can see that hole right there was out of, not quite centered. But anyway, those little butterfly plates like slide into these. They're cut through in the center. They're slits. So you can, I think, sort of see there on that one. Yeah, so once you drill them out, you can generally pretty much basically just pull them out with a pair of needle nose pliers. Now I'm going to go find a little brush, like a toothbrush or something, and use a whole lot more brake clean and just go to town on these.